My name is Helen. I am 74 years old, and I never thought I would live to see the day my own blood would look me in the eye and steal everything I worked for. The mansion I poured my entire life into, the estate worth $45 million that had my name printed on the deed, was the very same one I found myself locked out of, with a stranger's voice telling me, "Sorry, ma'am, your name isn't on the property anymore." I stood outside the iron gates of the grand house, the same gates I had walked through for over 30 years, clutching the old keys in my trembling hand. My two sons, Michael and David, were nowhere to be found. Just a week earlier, they had told me with soft, convincing smiles, "Mom, you should stay somewhere else while we renovate. You'll come back to something beautiful." I believed them. I trusted them. But now, the marble driveway was filled with unfamiliar cars, and the guards I had personally hired were replaced with men in suits who didn't even know my name. When I demanded to speak to my children, one of the men laughed and waved a paper in front of me. "This is no longer your house," he said coldly. My knees buckled. My whole body felt like it was being drained of life. My sons, the same boys I raised with my own hands, had cut my name off the deed. They had stolen my legacy, my safety, my home. But what they didn't know was that the real owner of the property was me. And I had one card left to play. I took a deep breath, steadied my shaking hands, and reached for my phone. With a quiet, firm voice, I said words that would change everything. "Connect me to the lawyer. Tell him Helen is calling. It's time they remembered who really owns this place." And right then, as the gates slammed shut before me, I knew this wasn't just betrayal. This was war. But before I tell you what happened when I made that call, let me take you back. Let me show you how I ended up here, how a mother's love turned into a battlefield for greed, and how two sons I nearly died bringing into this world dared to erase me from my own life. Because this story didn't begin at the gates of the mansion. It began long before, with me as a young woman, fighting to build a life from nothing and giving everything I had to two boys who would one day turn against me. And if you think what I've told you so far is shocking, wait until you hear what they did next. Helen here again. I'm sure by now, you're wondering how a mother could be pushed out of her own home by her children. Children who owe everything to her. It's a question I've asked myself for days. How could they do this? How did I miss the signs? But more importantly, how did I let them get so far? Let me take you back to when it all started. My life wasn't always filled with mansions and luxury. I was born into a small town in Arkansas, the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I was determined to give my children more than what I had growing up. I worked tirelessly, sacrificing my own happiness, my own dreams, just to ensure they never went without. David and Michael were my world. From the moment they were born, I knew my purpose was to raise them into men of character, to teach them the values of hard work and gratitude. I worked double shifts as a nurse and put my savings into their education, always encouraging them to dream big. I thought if I gave them everything, they'd one day return the favor. When David was accepted into Harvard and Michael secured an internship at a prestigious law firm, I felt like I had done something right. My heart swelled with pride. I watched them walk across the stage at their graduations, knowing that all my sacrifice had been worth it. But what I didn't realize was that my children were growing up with a sense of entitlement, not understanding the cost of everything they had. At first, the signs were subtle. Michael started talking about investing in properties and business ventures, telling me it was time I shared the wealth. He would sit in my kitchen, sipping coffee, talking about all the money I had saved over the years, as though it was his to manage. I brushed it off. He was my son, he wanted to help. And I wanted to believe that. But deep down, I began to feel a change. David, who was always so close to me, started pulling away, spending less time at home. He'd come over, say he was busy, and leave with a briefcase full of papers. Then came the renovation request. It sounded harmless at first, a simple, "Mom, you deserve some time off while we modernize the house." It didn't feel right, but I pushed those thoughts aside. After all, they were my children, my flesh and blood. They wouldn't hurt me, right? I agreed to go stay at my sister's house for a few weeks while they renovated. They promised it would only be a temporary move. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. When I returned to find the locks changed, my name erased from the deed, I knew the worst had already happened. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. They didn't just take a house from me. They took a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and effort. And when I walked through that gate for the first time, demanding to speak to my sons, I could feel their coldness. Michael stood there, a stranger behind a facade of politeness. David wasn't even around. I wonder now, did they even discuss what they'd done? Or was it just one of them that made the call? I wasn't allowed to enter the mansion I'd worked my whole life to provide for my family. And as I stood there, I couldn't help but wonder if this was some twisted plan from the very beginning. Was it always about the money? Was I just a stepping stone for their ambitions? But here's the thing, I'm not one to sit idly by and let my family walk all over me. I've fought for everything I have, and this was no different. I called the lawyer, the one who had handled the trust and estate for decades. As soon as I spoke his name, everything changed. I knew that what I was about to do would send shockwaves through my family. But if I had learned anything, it was this: you don't get to rob me of what's mine without consequences. The truth was clear. I was the real owner of that property. And this whole thing, it wasn't just about a house. It was about reclaiming my dignity. But what would they do when they found out the real owner was standing right outside their gates? What lengths would they go to hide their betrayal? As I hung up the phone, I took a deep breath. I had made my choice. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't just fighting for a property. I was fighting for my legacy, my respect, and the truth. And when I called the lawyer to make my move, it was clear. This war had only just begun. I felt like a different person the day I made that call. As the phone clicked and the lawyer's voice echoed through the receiver, something inside me solidified. I wasn't just standing there outside the gates of my own home anymore. I had crossed a line that my sons, David and Michael, would never have expected. But that's how it always is, isn't it? They think they have all the time in the world to get away with things, to deceive, to manipulate. They think they can erase you and take what you've worked your whole life for. But I wasn't the woman they thought I was. I wasn't a passive bystander in my own life. And this wasn't just about a house. It was about respect, betrayal, and the twisted need for power that I now saw so clearly in my sons. My lawyer's name was Richard Palmer, an old friend of my late husband. He had been more than just a lawyer to us. He was like family. He had handled the estate for years, and when I reached out to him that afternoon, I could hear the shock in his voice. I told him everything, how the property was transferred, how my name was removed from the deed, how my sons had schemed behind my back. "You've got a good case, Helen," Richard said after a long pause. "But you'll have to act quickly. They've probably already made arrangements with the bank and the title company. This isn't going to be easy. They'll fight you every step of the way." "I don't care," I said. "This isn't about money. It's about the principle. It's about my life's work." We discussed the next steps, which included getting a temporary restraining order against Michael and David to prevent them from selling the property. But Richard warned me that it wouldn't be simple. There would be court battles, legal fees, and the very real possibility that my sons would drag their own mother through the mud. Still, I was determined. I wasn't going to let them take this from me. Not without a fight. Not without them realizing what they had done to me. I could already feel the weight of the coming storm. The thought of standing in court against my own children, of exposing their lies, made me sick. But there was something in me now, something fierce, something I hadn't felt in years. A fire that I hadn't even realized was still burning inside. And as I hung up the phone with Richard, I knew this fight wasn't just for the house. It was for my dignity, my legacy, and most importantly, my freedom. The first thing I did was gather all the documents. Everything I had worked so hard to put in place. Trusts, wills, property deeds, insurance policies. All the things they thought I'd forgotten about. I knew that if I was going to win, I needed to have all the evidence. Michael and David were smart, but they underestimated me. They thought I was too old to care. Too tired to fight. The truth, however, was far different. I wasn't tired. I was awake. I was ready. As I walked through my house later that day, what was supposed to be my house, something hit me like a freight train. The picture frames were gone. The family photos had been stripped from the walls. The furniture that I'd picked out with my own hands, the pieces I'd gathered over the years from flea markets and estate sales, was gone. It was as if they had erased every trace of my existence from this place.
It was heartbreaking.
But what broke me even more was the thought that my sons had been behind it. The two boys I raised with my heart and soul. The ones I gave up everything for. But in the midst of the grief, there was a resolve. And something inside me whispered, not anymore. I began calling everyone I knew, trying to gather support. My closest friends were appalled at what my sons had done. But there was nothing anyone could do, not yet. The only thing left to do was wait for Richard to move forward with the legal documents. But as I waited, the weight of the situation grew. The threats my sons had made, the things they'd said to me about moving on, about letting them handle things, echoed in my mind. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase me. And that made my blood boil. I had already decided that if they thought they could take my life's work, then they were going to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong woman. The night before the court filing, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, and I kept thinking about all the times I had put them first, times when I had given them everything I had. And yet, here I was, fighting to protect what was rightfully mine. It didn't seem real. But as the sun began to rise, I knew the time had come. I put on my best suit, grabbed the papers, and drove to Richard's office. I wasn't just going to be a victim anymore. I was going to take action. I was going to remind them that I wasn't done. That was the first step. The first step in a battle that was going to cost me everything. But I didn't care anymore. I had already lost everything I thought mattered. What was left, I would fight for. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. And when the time came to face them in court, I would make them see who they were really dealing with. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I had imagined, and with it, the weight of 100 questions on my shoulders. Could I truly win this battle? Could I stand in front of my sons, my own flesh and blood, and expose the lies they had woven around me? The very idea made my heart pound. But there was no turning back now. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a suit that still made me feel strong, despite the emotions that tore at me inside. Richard met me in the lobby, his face serious but comforting. He handed me a folder of documents, all lined up and ready to present. "You're ready for this, Helen," he said, looking me in the eye. "This isn't just about the house anymore. This is about you taking back what's rightfully yours. Don't let them intimidate you. We've got the evidence. You have a solid case." I nodded, though the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. As I followed him into the courtroom, I could hear the whispers of people around us, family, friends, people from the neighborhood. Word had gotten out about the legal battle, and everyone had an opinion on what was happening. I could feel their eyes on me. I wasn't just fighting for my property. I was fighting for my reputation, for my dignity, for everything I had worked so hard to build. I took my seat, and moments later, my sons walked in, flanked by their attorneys. The sight of them in their expensive suits hit me like a physical blow. Michael walked in first, his usual air of confidence, his jaw set tightly. His eyes flicked to me briefly, but there was no warmth. There never was there? David followed, looking much less certain. He was avoiding eye contact with me, like he didn't want to face the woman he had betrayed. I could see the subtle unease in his body language. Perhaps somewhere deep inside, he knew what he was doing was wrong. But it was too late for apologies now. I glanced at Richard, who gave me a reassuring nod. As the judge called the court to order, I felt my hands start to tremble again, but I gripped the armrest, steadying myself. The proceedings began, and it didn't take long for the tension to rise. The opposing attorney, a slick, well-dressed man in his mid-40s, stood up and addressed the court. He spoke with an air of superiority, outlining how Michael and David were entitled to the property and how I had no legal grounds to challenge their decision. His words stung, each one more callous than the last. "You've heard the facts, Your Honor," the attorney said, looking directly at me. "Ms. Helen McKinney is no longer the owner of this property. It was transferred into the names of her sons legally. She has no right to question their decisions. I could feel the weight of his words, but I also knew they were a lie. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Richard rose from his seat, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Your Honor, if I may?" Richard said, his voice steady but firm. "We are not here to contest a mere transaction. We are here because a mother's right to her property has been violated by her own children. We have the original trust documents, the will, and the deed, all signed and filed long before the so-called renovation even began." I watched the attorney's face falter for a moment. It was like I could see the small cracks in their perfect plan, and I was ready to shatter them completely. The judge motioned for Richard to continue. "As you can see," Richard continued, "Helen McKinney is not only the rightful owner of this estate, but she is the sole beneficiary of her late husband's fortune. This was not a casual handover. This was a deliberate, orchestrated attempt to erase her from her own legacy." The room fell silent. Michael and David exchanged looks, their faces stiffening. I could see the fear in their eyes now, a fear they hadn't shown when they thought they could take everything from me without consequences. The judge looked at both parties, then at me, his expression unreadable. "I will need to review the documents before making a decision. The hearing will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding.
Tomorrow.
The battle wasn't over. But I had the upper hand now. They had underestimated me. As we stood to leave the courtroom, Michael stopped in front of me. For a brief, awkward moment, we locked eyes. His face was unreadable, but I saw something in him. Something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe? Or was it just fear? "Mom," he said, his voice tight. I didn't want it to go this far. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. All I could do was look at him, as if seeing him for the first time. And then he walked away. The day felt long, and I could barely sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sons' faces, flashes of the past, their laughter when they were children, their first steps, their first words. And then I thought about what they had done and how I had trusted them. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of the world pressing down on me. I knew today could change everything. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't even about the house. It was about the trust one had placed in them and the betrayal I now had to face. I was walking into the courtroom not just to reclaim a home, but to reclaim my dignity, to show them that I was more than just their mother. I was their equal. As I sat in the courtroom waiting for the judge to arrive, I saw my sons again. But this time, they didn't have the same confidence. They looked almost desperate. I knew that whatever happened today, they were about to realize they had messed with the wrong person. And when the judge entered, it was time to let the truth come out. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. As I sat there, the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My heart thudded in my chest, and I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck, though I kept my face calm. This was the moment. The judge was about to decide who would walk away with everything or nothing. I glanced at my sons, sitting across from me. Michael looked as if he were trying to mask his nervousness with a veneer of confidence, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt. David, on the other hand, sat motionless, his gaze fixed ahead. He hadn't said a word to me since the previous day. Maybe he was finally beginning to understand the gravity of what he had done. The judge entered the room, and the air seemed to shift. His presence was commanding, yet calm.
He didn't waste time.
He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and glanced at the papers before him. I could hear the faint rustle of pages turning, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. After reviewing the documents and hearing both sides of this case, the judge began, his voice even but firm. "I have come to a conclusion." My stomach nodded. It was now or never. He paused, looking at each of us in turn before addressing me directly. "Miss Helen McKinney, you are indeed the rightful owner of the property in question, according to the will and trust left by your late husband. The transfer of the deed to your sons was not legally executed in accordance with the terms of the trust." The words hit me like a wave. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had won. I had actually won. But as the judge continued, I realized that the battle was far from over. However, he continued, this is not a simple matter. Your sons, Mr. Michael McKinney and Mr. David McKinney, will have the opportunity to present their defense regarding the intentions behind the transfer of the property. A hearing for this matter will be scheduled in a few weeks. Until then, I am issuing a temporary injunction preventing the sale or transfer of the property. I sat there, stunned. For a brief second, the world seemed to stop moving. The victory wasn't complete. There was more to come. More waiting. More uncertainty. Michael and David exchanged glances, their faces pale. But I could also see the glimmer of hope in their eyes, a glimmer that I had not expected. They thought they had won. They thought they could twist the story and make their case. But they were wrong. I wasn't done fighting. The judge's decision didn't end the case. It was only the beginning. He had granted a temporary injunction, but that didn't mean the property was mine yet. My sons had the chance to fight back, and that meant they would try everything they could to take what wasn't theirs. I could already feel their determination, their refusal to let go of what they believed was rightfully theirs. I stood up slowly, my knees shaking, but my resolve stronger than ever. I wasn't going to let them take this from me, not again. Not without exposing everything they had done to get here. As I walked out of the courtroom with Richard, I felt a strange mix of emotions.
Victory, yes.
But also dread. Dread over what my sons might do next. I had won the first round, but the war was far from over. The next few weeks were torture. I couldn't rest. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face, cold and indifferent, and David's, regretful, but unwilling to step forward and do what was right. They had pushed me into this corner. They had forced my hand. And now they would pay the price. The media caught wind of the case, and soon the whole town was buzzing about it. It was no longer just a family matter, it was a spectacle. People from all walks of life were talking about the McKinney family scandal. The whispers, the rumors, they all pointed to one thing: betrayal. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my sons weren't just fighting for the house. They were fighting for something more. What I didn't know yet was that there was more beneath the surface than just greed. There were secrets. Secrets that my sons had kept from me for years, and now they were about to come to light. The next hearing was set for weeks later. But even then, I knew my battle wasn't just with the law. It was with my own blood. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, and as the next hearing loomed closer, the weight of everything grew heavier on my shoulders. I had spent my days combing through old papers, rereading documents, and seeking counsel. Richard was by my side, but there was an unease in his eyes that mirrored my own. I knew this wasn't going to be as straightforward as we had hoped. I hadn't seen Michael or David since the courtroom, but I could feel their presence in the air, like an unspoken tension that hovered, always just out of reach. They were plotting, I knew that. They had to be. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else, something darker. What if this wasn't just about the house? What if they wanted something more than just money? What if they had been hiding something from me for years? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. But what was it? It wasn't until I received a call from Richard that everything started to make sense. His voice was tense, even over the phone. "Helen, I think you need to prepare yourself. There's something you need to know." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Michael and David didn't just transfer the deed behind your back," Richard said, his words coming out slowly. "They've been planning this for years. And there's a third party involved, someone you didn't know about." I froze, my thoughts racing. "A third party? Who? Who is it?" I demanded. "I don't have all the details yet, but I've uncovered some documents. They've been funneling money into a separate account, a separate fund. And that fund isn't just linked to the house. It's linked to something much bigger, something your sons have been hiding from you." I could feel the air get thicker, the walls closing in. My sons, the ones I had raised and nurtured, had been keeping secrets from me for years. I had given them everything: my love, my trust, my hard-earned money. And they had been plotting against me the whole time. Richard continued, his voice barely a whisper. I think we're looking at a conspiracy here, Helen. This isn't just about the house. It's about power, control, and something much darker. You need to be prepared. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My own flesh and blood had been lying to me. They had been playing me for a fool. I'm coming to see you now, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. I need to know everything. When I arrived at Richard's office, he handed me a thick file of documents. As I flipped through them, my mind raced. I saw contracts, bank statements, and legal documents that made my blood run cold. There were transfers of money, hidden assets, and investments I had never known about. But what struck me the most was the name I saw on one of the contracts, an unfamiliar name, someone I had never heard of before. It was then that the truth hit me like a slap across the face. Michael and David hadn't just been playing me, they had been playing everyone. There was a third party involved, and this person was not just some distant acquaintance. This was someone close to my family, someone I never expected. Richard, who is this? I asked, pointing to the name on the contract. He looked at the name, then back at me. I think you already know the answer, Helen.
My heart sank.
I stared at the name, the realization sinking in. It was someone I had trusted, someone I had loved and supported. David's wife. This whole time, I had assumed that my sons were the masterminds behind the betrayal. But the truth was far worse. David's wife, the woman I had welcomed into my family, had been working with my sons all along. Together, they had been planning to take everything from me. They had been plotting to steal not just my property, but my legacy. I could feel the anger rising in me, hotter than anything I had ever felt before. But I couldn't let it consume me. Not yet. I had to stay calm. I had to think clearly. Richard, we need to act fast. We need to confront them, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He nodded. We'll have to be careful. They've been covering their tracks. But if we're going to stop them, we need to expose them for what they really are. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. The betrayal wasn't just about a house. It was about something much more insidious. They had been using me as a pawn in their game, and I had been blind to it. But not anymore. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and I knew that it was my last chance to take control. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I was going to expose them for the frauds they were. The night before the hearing, I went over the evidence once more. The documents Richard had uncovered were solid. We had proof of everything. Every illegal transfer, every hidden asset, every lie. I wasn't going to let them weasel their way out of this. As I sat there in my living room, preparing for the next day's battle, I couldn't help but think of how far things had gone. The betrayal, the secrets, the lies, it was all too much. But I was ready. I was going to fight for what was mine, and I wasn't going to let my sons or their accomplice get away with it. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to lose it all now. And tomorrow, I would show them just how far I was willing to go to take back what they had stolen. The day of the hearing was finally upon me. I had prepared for weeks, going over every document, every email, and every piece of evidence that Richard and I had uncovered. But nothing could fully prepare me for the tension that gripped my chest as I walked into that courtroom where the final confrontation would take place. Today wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about exposing the betrayal that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. As I stood at the back of the courtroom, watching the familiar figures of my sons and their attorneys sit confidently at their table, I knew things would never be the same. I looked at Michael and David. Michael sat with his arms crossed, his eyes cold and distant, while David kept his gaze fixed on the table, avoiding my eyes. It was as if he knew that today, the truth was going to be laid bare. But what struck me the most was the woman sitting next to David. His wife. The woman I had treated like a daughter, the one I had welcomed into my family with open arms. And now, I was about to find out exactly how deep her role in this betrayal ran. Richard leaned in and whispered, "This is it. We've got them cornered. If we present the evidence the right way, we'll win this today." I nodded, my heart pounding. But there was something else I needed to do. I needed to make them feel the full weight of what they had done. They needed to understand that I wasn't just a woman they could push around. I was their mother. And I wasn't backing down. The judge entered the room, and the air shifted. The final showdown was about to begin. Richard rose first, his voice steady but forceful as he addressed the judge. Your Honor, as we've discussed, we have substantial evidence that the transfer of the deed was not only illegal but done with malicious intent. The defendants, Michael and David McKinney, along with Mrs. Sarah McKinney, are guilty of orchestrating a fraudulent scheme to steal the property from their mother, Ms. Helen McKinney. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. My sons shifted in their seats. Sarah, sitting at David's side, glanced nervously at the attorney, who leaned over and whispered something to her. I could see the shift in her demeanor. The calm confidence that she had walked in with was starting to crack. Richard continued, "We have bank statements, witness testimonies, and digital communications that show how they conspired together to forge documents and mislead the authorities. But most importantly, we have the will and trust documents, signed and validated by the late Mr. McKinney himself, which make it clear that Helen McKinney is the rightful owner of the estate." I could feel my pulse racing as the words hit. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control of the situation. But I wasn't done. There was still one more thing I needed to do. I stood up slowly, and the courtroom turned its attention toward me. The judge looked up, his gaze soft but attentive. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I've spent my entire life building this family, raising my children, and making sacrifices so that they would never know the hardships I faced growing up. I gave them everything I had, and this is how they repay me." I paused, letting my words sink in. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see Michael's jaw clenching, his frustration growing with every word. David's face was a mask of guilt, but he wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. "This isn't just about money, Your Honor," I continued, my eyes fixed on my sons. "This is about respect, about loyalty, about everything that they took from me. My love, my time, my trust. And now they want to take what's rightfully mine. But I will not stand by and let them do that. Not without a fight." I turned back to the judge. "I am asking for the property to be returned to me, and for my sons and their accomplice to be held accountable for their actions. They cannot be allowed to get away with this." The room was still. The only sound was the quiet shuffle of papers as the judge reviewed the evidence. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, an understanding, perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The judge cleared his throat and looked up. "I have reviewed the evidence carefully, and while there is no question that Helen McKinney is the rightful owner of the property, the situation is more complex than we initially thought." My heart sank. What was he about to say? "I have some serious concerns regarding the actions of the defendants. The evidence presented is damning, but I also need to consider the intent behind these actions. Was it purely financial gain? Or was there another reason for the fraud?" I felt the air grow thicker with each passing second. What was he trying to imply? And he continued, "We will need to hear further testimony regarding the involvement of Mrs. Sarah McKinney. Given the information presented, it seems clear that she played a significant role in the orchestrating of this scheme." My eyes snapped to Sarah, who visibly stiffened in her chair. She had been sitting there, silent, waiting for her moment to strike. But now it was clear. The judge wasn't going to let her off the hook either. The judge turned to the defense. "I will be scheduling another hearing to go over the full extent of Mrs. McKinney's involvement. We need to fully understand the dynamics at play here." I couldn't believe it. They were going to dig deeper. My sons were going to be exposed, but so was Sarah. But as the judge called for a recess, my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't over. It was far from over. I had no idea how deep this conspiracy went. The fact that Sarah was so involved meant there were more lies yet to be uncovered. I didn't know how much longer I could keep my composure. But one thing was for sure, my sons weren't just going to sit back and let this happen. They would fight until the very end. And when they did, I would be ready. The recess felt like an eternity. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the air thick with anticipation. I sat at the table, my hands folded tightly in front of me, my mind racing. The judge's words had thrown me for a loop. I had expected this to be the day I finally reclaimed my home, but instead, it felt like everything was shifting under my feet. Sarah McKinney, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had welcomed into my home with open arms, was now under investigation. I couldn't believe it. I had always thought she was just a quiet presence in the background, a wife doing her part.
But now?
Now it seemed she was the mastermind behind the whole scheme, working in tandem with my sons to take everything from me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something darker. Something I hadn't seen coming. Sarah had been playing a game with me, pretending to be the loving daughter-in-law, while in reality, she was planning to destroy me. I looked across the courtroom at my sons. Michael sat with his head in his hands, his posture defeated. I could see the weight of the situation beginning to sink in. David, on the other hand, looked almost panicked, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Neither of them made eye contact with me. They knew they were caught, but they had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. Richard leaned in and whispered, "We've got them now, Helen. The judge is giving us the chance to expose everything. But we need to hit them with the hard evidence. Once Sarah's role in this is clear, it'll be over." I nodded, my stomach a knot of tension. But even with the upper hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Michael and David weren't going to go down without a fight. And with Sarah now a key player, I knew the stakes were even higher. The judge finally returned to the bench, and the room quieted instantly. The tension was almost unbearable. "Ms. McKinney," the judge said, his voice calm but stern, "I've reviewed the case, and I believe we have a clear picture of what transpired. However, there are still unanswered questions regarding the involvement of Mrs. Sarah McKinney." I held my breath. This was the moment. "Mrs. McKinney," the judge continued, addressing Sarah directly, "you've been implicated in the orchestration of fraudulent activities regarding the ownership of your mother-in-law's property. I would like to hear your statement regarding the accusations brought against you." Sarah stood, her face pale but composed. She glanced briefly at David, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat, before turning her gaze to the judge. Her expression was a mask of innocence, but I could see the cracks starting to show. "I don't know what's going on here," Sarah said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I'm just trying to support my husband and my family. I've done nothing wrong. I don't understand why I'm being dragged into this." Her words were calculated, but they didn't have the effect she was hoping for. I could see through her act. I knew she was lying. The fear in her eyes was all the proof I needed. "Your Honor," Richard interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension, "we have emails, texts, and financial records that show Mrs. McKinney was directly involved in the transactions."
She was not just a passive participant.
She actively sought out the transfer of the deed, even going as far as forging signatures. We also have evidence of secret bank accounts and payments that were made to her directly, all of which were designed to conceal the illegal activity from Ms. Helen McKinney. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to Sarah, who now looked more uncomfortable than ever. The facade she had built up was crumbling, piece by piece. The judge spoke again, his tone serious. "It seems we have more than enough evidence to proceed with further investigation into Mrs. McKinney's role in this matter. I will be issuing a subpoena to investigate the financial transactions and personal communications further." For a moment, I felt a surge of triumph. Finally, the truth was being exposed. But then, I looked at Michael and David again, and the anger in their eyes made me pause. They were panicking. They knew they were losing control. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, but I wasn't backing down. I had given them everything, and they had turned it all into a nightmare. I wasn't about to let them destroy everything I had worked for. The judge continued, "I will reconvene this hearing in 2 weeks, by which time we will have the results of the subpoena. Until then, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order to prevent the sale or transfer of any assets linked to the McKinney estate." I exhaled, but my mind was already racing ahead. I knew this wasn't over. My sons wouldn't let go of what they thought was theirs without a fight. And Sarah? I had no doubt that she was going to do everything she could to cover her tracks. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. The evidence was on my side. The truth was coming to light. And soon, my sons would have no choice but to face what they had done. As I walked out of the courtroom, Richard by my side, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The next few weeks would be crucial. The battle wasn't just with my sons, it was with the lie they had built around themselves. And when it all came crashing down, I wasn't sure who would be left standing. But one thing was for certain, I wasn't going to lose. The next 2 weeks felt like an eternity. As the date of the reconvened hearing approached, I found myself unable to relax, unable to escape the constant thoughts swirling in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's angry face, David's guilt-ridden expression, and Sarah's cold, calculating eyes. But it wasn't just their faces that haunted me. It was the thought of what they had taken from me, the years I had spent building my family, my empire, my life, and how quickly they had thrown it all away in the pursuit of greed. And now, with the subpoena in place, I knew the truth was coming. The evidence we had was undeniable. Sarah's role in the conspiracy was about to be exposed for the world to see. But what would it mean for my sons? What would it mean for the family we had once been? Richard had been in constant contact with the authorities, pushing for the investigation to move as quickly as possible. The emails, the bank statements, the hidden transactions, it was all too much for them to cover up. But even as we waited for the official findings, I knew that my sons would do anything to avoid the consequences. They wouldn't go down quietly. On the morning of the hearing, I woke up with a sense of dread in my gut. I had prepared myself for this moment. I had gotten used to the idea that my family might never be the same again. But that didn't make it any easier. I dressed slowly, my hands trembling as I buttoned up my jacket. I could already hear Richard's voice in my head, urging me to stay focused, stay calm. The worst was over. The truth was finally within our reach. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I arrived at the courthouse early, as usual. Richard met me in the lobby, looking tense but determined. He had an air of quiet confidence, but I could see the weariness in his eyes. He had been working tirelessly to prepare for this day, and I knew that whatever happened, we were going to give it everything we had. As we walked into the courtroom, I felt the familiar weight of the room settle over me. The judge was already seated at the bench, his gavel resting in front of him. Michael and David were seated at their table, their lawyers flanking them. Sarah was sitting beside David, her eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding my gaze. I could feel the energy in the room shift. There was a palpable tension in the air, a sense that everyone knew this would be the moment when everything changed. The judge called the proceedings to order, and the courtroom fell silent. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I could hear the low hum of whispers, but they quickly quieted as the judge looked over the documents before him. "We are here today to continue the investigation into the McKinney estate," the judge began, his voice firm and commanding. "As you all know, the evidence presented thus far has led to the involvement of Mrs. Sarah McKinney in the fraudulent actions regarding the transfer of the property. We will now hear the results of the subpoena, which will shed light on the extent of her role in this matter." I watched Sarah's face as the judge spoke. Her eyes flickered for the briefest moment, but she quickly regained her composure. I could feel the tension in her. She knew that her carefully constructed web of lies was about to come crashing down. Richard rose first, his voice steady as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, we have gathered the final evidence regarding Mrs. Sarah McKinney's involvement in the fraudulent transfer of the McKinney estate. The documents we have presented today show a clear pattern of manipulation, coercion, and deceit. We also have evidence of secret accounts and financial transactions linked directly to Mrs. McKinney, which were used to fund the illegal activities." The room was dead silent as Richard spoke. Every word he said felt like another nail in Sarah's coffin. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, but I didn't look away. This was my moment. We also have recorded communications between Mrs. McKinney and the defendants, Michael and David McKinney, which show that she played a central role in orchestrating the entire plan to strip Ms. Helen McKinney of her property. These communications prove that she was not merely a passive participant, but an active conspirator in this scheme. I saw Sarah's hand shake as Richard spoke. It was the first real sign of vulnerability I had seen from her. The judge nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I see. Mrs. McKinney, would you like to address the court?" Sarah stood up, her posture stiff, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse right there. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice wavering. "Your Honor, I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to help my family. I thought I was doing what was best. I didn't know things would get so out of hand." Her words were weak, almost pleading. She wasn't even looking at me now. She was speaking directly to the judge, hoping for mercy. But there was no mercy left for her. The judge remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Mrs. McKinney, your actions have caused irreparable damage to your family. You have been caught in a web of lies and deceit, and now the consequences of those actions must be faced." As Sarah stood there, her face drained of color, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about justice, about making sure that my family knew that I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. "I'm requesting that Mrs. McKinney be held accountable for her role in this matter," Richard said, his voice unwavering. "She must face the full extent of the law." The judge looked down at his papers and then up at Sarah. "I agree. The investigation will continue, and charges will be filed against Mrs. McKinney for her actions in this case. The defendants, Michael and David McKinney, will also be held accountable for their role in this fraudulent scheme." It was done. The truth had come out. But as I sat there, a sense of finality settling over me, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen now? What kind of family would I have left once all of this was over? Would Michael and David ever look at me the same way again? Would they ever understand the pain they caused me? Only time would tell. But for now, I had won. The days following the hearing were a blur. The truth had come out, and yet, the weight of it all pressed heavily on me. My sons were caught. Sarah had been exposed. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that lingered. The courtroom victory felt hollow, as though I had won a battle but lost something far more precious in the process, my family. As the weeks passed, the legal process continued, but the emotional toll of everything became more apparent. Richard kept in contact, updating me on the developments. The charges against Sarah were finalized, and my sons, Michael and David, were now facing serious legal consequences for their roles in the conspiracy. But none of it seemed to bring me peace. I spent my days alone in the house, my house. The house I had worked so hard to build, to create a sanctuary for my children. Now, the rooms felt empty, haunted by memories of a family I no longer recognized. Every corner, every picture frame, reminded me of the love I had poured into them. But now it was just a shell. I thought of Michael and David, how they had turned against me, how they had betrayed everything I had ever done for them. They were supposed to be my legacy, the ones who would carry on my work, my name. But instead, they had thrown it all away in their quest for money and power. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that they had stolen from me or the fact that they had stolen my trust. I had loved them with all my heart, and they had repaid me with lies. But I couldn't let it consume me. I had fought for this, and I wasn't going to let them take my peace of mind as well. The final court hearing was scheduled for a month after the last proceedings. This time it was the sentencing. Sarah's fate was sealed, and my sons would finally face the consequences of their actions. But as I sat in the courtroom that final day, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever be able to forgive them? Would they ever understand what they had done to me? As the judge read out the verdict, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was numb to the words. The law had done its job. The justice I had fought so hard for was finally being served. Sarah was sentenced to serve time for her role in the conspiracy, and Michael and David would face heavy fines and probation. But none of it mattered to me anymore. What had been taken from me could never be returned. And what I had lost, the trust, the love, the family, was something that could never be rebuilt. As I walked out of the courtroom for the last time, I glanced at my sons. Michael's face was a mask of anger, while David's was filled with guilt. But neither of them looked at me. They didn't seem to understand what they had done. They didn't seem to grasp that, in their pursuit of money, they had destroyed the very thing that had held us together: our family. And yet, there was still a part of me that longed for things to be different, that hoped, deep down, that one day they would realize the cost of their actions, that they would come to me, apologize, and somehow find a way back to the family we once were. But as I walked away from the courthouse, I knew the truth. That day would never come. They were too far gone. The house was mine again, but the battle had taken its toll. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: I would never let anyone take me for granted again. And with that, I turned the page. The story of my family had come to an end, and now I had to begin writing the next chapter of my life.